Hi, Dwayne. Just in time, man. He's early. All right, welcome everybody to a joint session of the Planning Commission and Mount Crested Butte Town Council. Thanks everybody for being here. Who's leading us off?
You want to go first, Hillary?
I was just going to introduce you.
All right, awesome. Over here.
So since we've had our recalibration, we've been working on a number of things. Hopefully y'all got my update email on Friday, outlining the various things that we've done in terms of outreach and surveying and farmers market tabling. And let's see, what else have we done? We've completed the drafts for both the Gothic Road corridor study, addressing capacity within the corridor, and then the Mount Crested Butte transit study. And am I forgetting anything else that we've?
I mean, we're working on several other things.
Yes, we're working on a number of other things, including a transportation demand management strategy, and the draft here will be coming out with that sometime in July. And so this is just an update to bring you to where we are so far, the outcome of all of the engagement, and then of course those two transportation studies. So Tori's here with Norris Design, and I believe we have some other folks that are online with us. I can't see. Shada from TEI is on Zoom, and I suppose I could also look here. Great. And it looks like we've got some folks from our base area owners group and from our focus groups. So really excited to have some members of the public joining us as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to Tori.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
How's everybody going? Everybody have a fantastic 4th. Just totally epic, right? Okay, awesome. So as Hillary mentioned, we're going to do a recalibration update, talk about survey, talk about transit stuff. It's going to be awesome. Here's a quick outline of what we'll be going over. First, we're going to start with those survey and community outreach results. We'll go into some community vision principles that we've been working on, and then dive into the transit study, got the capacity, and an update for the transportation demand management. And that's when Shada will get on. We'll briefly go over the schedule, and then we'll have like questions and answers at the end. However, if when Shada is going over transit and stuff, and we have really important questions that we need to ask right now, that's totally fine. Same thing with the survey. If we want to just dive in, we can go back and forth, but just know that we did have that at the end for us too, just in case. So if you want to hold, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too.
Before you get going, sorry, our handheld mic is not working. We do need to end at 5:50 so that we'll cut into some component of this a little bit, but
Okay.
I'll give you a 5-minute warning.
Okay, I'll try to go fast.
All right.
It's hard sometimes. Okay. All right. Community outreach summary of fun things. So we got such a great response to this survey as well as community outreach this time. And I know a lot of that has to do with all of you. You guys sent out emails, posted things, on your businesses. It's amazing. So last time, we barely got 100 responses, and this time we got 389, so almost 400 respondents for the online survey. And then we also made 150 contacts at the farmers market table, which is great. So in total, 539 contacts to get some outreach, which is great. Nearly half of those respondents live right here in Mount CB, and then the other half are made up of living in CB, within the Gunnison Valley, or other locations, that other locations being the next highest number. Nearly half
those other locations were second homeowners for here.
I'm sorry, Janet, one more time.
How many of those, that 35% of other locations were actually second homeowners for here?
Well, we didn't have a ton of comments noting that they were also second homeowners, but it was about where their main residence is. But I would say, just to guess, that probably a high percentage of that would be second homeowners, and then some visitors. But since it's an online survey response, I bet you it's mostly second homeowners for that response. just to note, nearly half of those respondents were of that 46 to 65 year age range. That was our highest category, followed up by the 36 to 45 range, and then 65 over 65, and then the 26 to 35 and under 25. This graphic shown to the right here is just basically showing that graphically, that information of, you know, the highest age range that we got respondents from, as well as location. All right, so overall, with the questions from the survey, housing for locals rose to the top of the list of most issues facing the community alongside base area vibrancy. Conservation of open space and aging infrastructure were also cited as top issues for more than 1 in 5 respondents. When asked to identify the type of development that they want to see in the town of Mount CB, overwhelmingly restaurants and bars, and then also development, housing for locals, and a small grocery store were top choices. The graphics to the right here are kind of showing the questions that mostly related to these things. So the how would you spend $10 within the city is that $ graphic, and that's, you know, housing for locals at the top, and then moving into increased commercial options, parks and trails, rec center or gym, transportation, mobility, and then moving down to arts and cultural facilities, parking, and childcare. What types of development would we like to see? That's that next graphic just below that. And so you see that big orange bar, that restaurant and bars, housing for locals, following up with that, and then small grocery store just behind that. And you can kind of see what trickled down beyond that as well. Which are the most important issues facing Mount Crested Butte? That's the big graphic to the right with the house, as the blue house is the main guy. And that's that 59% for housing for locals, followed up by a 52% base area vibrancy. So those were really neck and neck. And then beyond that, the conservation open space infrastructure, kind of like what the summary was noting, but that's what that graphic is kind of showing. So we wanted to make sure that we focus on the winter experience during this survey. So we asked a couple of very pointed questions about the winter experience. Food and beverage is also at the top of the list with the respondents from there. Also noted was nightlife and gathering spaces. People are also very interested in outdoor events, you know, outdoor markets, outdoor movies, and concerts. The top desired wintertime amenities or activities are snowshoeing and Nordic skiing, as well as sledding and tubing hill. And obviously skiing and snowboarding is always, you know, at our top, but that's like, we have that and it's awesome. So that's like the things that we feel like could happen that would be, you know, increase that winter experience and make people want to travel or stay or all the things. Okay, so before I move on to community vision principles, any, you know, really pressing questions right now?
Watching movies in the winter outside.
I'm sorry, Janet.
I just can't imagine watching movies outdoor during the winter.
Well, I mean, I guess if you just went skiing and you've got all your ski gear on and you want to watch, you know, an epic ski video outside, I could see it. But that's also could be a summer activity. It could be both.
So they didn't necessarily answer winter answers, but they were winter people, they were winter questions.
Well, the amenities or activities that would encourage you to visit and travel to Mount Crested Butte was that question, but we put specific winter activities as options. The previous question, or the one to the left, is the, you know, what would most improve your winter experience?
I read that to be overall, you would go to round out your experience, not sit in the snow and watch.
Any other questions? We can always do this at the end too, if you want to hold them, but just want to make sure I'm addressing anybody's pressing stuff. All right. Okay, Hold on, Hillary's coming over.
Is anyone driving a silver Nissan Rogue with Florida plates?
They're part of the wedding garden.
Okay, it's none of you guys. Okay, thank you.
The other one's mine.
I just wanted to add on the demographic piece and, seeing that it was really heavily tilted towards one demographic was the reason why we actually went out to the farmer's market to engage with more members of the community and have that kind of comprehensive, holistic view. And while it wasn't represented necessarily in the charrette dots, we definitely had kids and, more younger folks that typically don't engage in these types of efforts that responded to a lot of this stuff. So, and that it can also be seen anecdotally in some of the desired, some of these issues that you see here, or desired development where there's not a pressing or what is expressed as a need for education, childcare programs and facilities. Childcare fell to the bottom on all responses, which is really interesting because in a lot of areas, childcare is at such a premium and is very difficult to come by. And I think that's also reflected in the demographics that responded to this. So I just wanted to add that.
For sure, absolutely. Anytime that there is a request for housing for locals or housing for families, you always need childcare. That's always something that you want to take in hand.
Do we have a, because I can't remember all the questions on there, do we have a list of how the questions were asked in the options somewhere?
So all of the questions and what the answers were or what the options were, yes.
Yeah, just because, like you said, generally there's a correlation between locals housing and childcare. When you have locals housing being number one and childcare being clear at the bottom, it kind of makes me wonder if how the questions were structured.
Right. And I also think that, it's a topic of, a lot of things where please choose your top three. And right now people are thinking that way, that these are our top three, and that, childcare maybe isn't, as important in their minds when they're choosing those top three. They're like, oh, I got to get that housing for locals, but it's definitely something for the town to consider.
I think you need to keep in mind the age demographic.
Also the age demographic,
Understood. Yeah, I'm just asking for the questions. That's all I'm asking for.
Yep.
To see the questions again. Yeah.
Yep, the town has a copy of all the questions and the answers and how they were listed. Alrighty. All right, so we just wanted to give a brief overview. The other outreach that we did is we met with all our groups, our steering group, our stakeholders group, as well as our base area owners. And this slide is really just an overview of, what we discussed and things that were brought up. So, and we had a lot of great feedback. So we just loved being able to meet with everybody, and we did some active murals live on Zoom, and it was awesome. The base area owners meeting was held on June 16th. We reviewed the initial survey results and outreach data, and we also performed a SWOT on the base area. That's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats all together. And some of the strengths in the positive area and were like shared goals amongst the property owners, concentration of activity, embracing density in our town core, and public transportation as strengths. Weaknesses were things like parking, limiting uniqueness, no main hangout or lodge area, and some lack of authenticity that was felt. Some opportunities that were mentioned: connection to Gothic Road, injection of more character, create some synergy, density, walkability, multiple gathering or intimate hangout spaces, as well as a couple other more. But those were kind of like some main things that we talked about in depth. Some threats that were also brought up were some alignment, and that's alignment between those owners as well as the town, and making sure that we're all going towards the goal that we collectively want to reach. Some fear of change, and that's kind of like a community-wide vibe, fear of change. Making sure that communication is very clear so that we can maybe avoid that fear of change a little bit more, making sure that all of that is going on. And then the misunderstanding of what density really means, as well as, and height and parking. So that was kind of the overall for what we did with the SWOT exercise with the base area owns. We also did like a draft review of goals and policies for placemaking and vibrancy in relation to the base area. And we got great feedback on that as well. And we're updating that draft and taking all of that feedback in account when we're doing that. For the stakeholders, also held on June 16th, very, very popular day. We also reviewed initial survey and outreach data with those guys. And we conducted a feedback grid for the community vision principles, which we're gonna go over next. But there was a lot of focus with the stakeholder group on housing. We spent most of that hour and a half on housing and ideas and thoughts and, you know, negative things that we need to keep in mind, all of those things. But lots of great ideas revolved around regional partnerships, land use mapping, intention, neighborhood vibrancy, affordable housing retention, the current economy, as well as childcare, short-term rentals, and that communication with the community, as well as a couple other things. But those were kind of like the main takeaways from that meeting. For the steering group meeting that was held on June 20th, again, we reviewed that initial survey and outreach data with everyone. We conducted a feedback grid with them as well on the community vision principles. We made it a little bit farther beyond housing with that one, which was great. We focused a little bit on housing, but also placemaking vibrancy. Those were the two main principles that we, you know, dove in deeper, but the other principles were hit on while we were kind of going over those. Lots of other great thoughts on that. For housing, regional alignment, any grant opportunities that the town can look at, making sure that we have a mix of different rental needs, and partnerships with employers, any economic issues that we should be aware of, and then enforcement and incentives. For ideas on placemaking vibrancy, we had a lot of emphasis on walkability and access. So that's kind of a big deal. And I think that's in multiple levels, not just like being able to walk around the base area, but like what you can see, what you can easily access and know where it is. Also, the current DDA efforts that are going on right now, events, markets, food trucks, improving skier drop-off, and creating interactive spaces, as well as a couple other things. But those were kind of some main good, fun ideas about placemaking and vibrancy.
A question.
For sure.
At what point is this a tool for the base area owners to take action?
I think that like this feedback that we take, not only from the survey and the outreach and these group meetings, but they will affect the, you know, the goals, the policies and recommendations that we put into the master plan. And the base area owners can take those and know what the town's goals are and what their focus is, or what we might need to do, as well as the economic study too. But taking all these things and be like, okay, so if I want to develop this plot of land, I might need to do this. I might need to focus on parking. I might need to focus on gathering spaces and making sure that we have that, street level or, pedestrian level access to whether it's retail or restaurants. Obviously those were desired in the survey. So they can take all this information and be like, okay, I know what the community needs and I know what the town's goals are. And now I can move forward and I know how to proceed with this development. Or if they're going to do a renovation or any of those things. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, there's empty spaces now that can be filled, and I'm just wondering, fill them rather than ask what needs to happen.
For sure. And I think that that's in relation to that synergy. And I think they know that it's lacking and that they want it to have more synergy and get those spaces filled. And I think that they are focused on it for sure. Yes, sir.
Was money
like off the table from the base area owner group, or I'm surprised the cost isn't in any of the SWOT analysis.
You know, we didn't talk a ton about the cost, but something that did come up with in relation to cost was parking. So we talked about, you know, a possible development on the Cimarron lot and how you would do that, because there's no way to park it unless you dig down really deep, which would be extremely expensive. So talking about, you know, offsite parking or how you would accomplish that. So that was brought up. It wasn't, we didn't go into super detail about it, but that was definitely a cost item that was brought up that we talked about. For sure.
Right.
Absolutely, Michael.
Tag team on your question, Roman. Roman mentioned, or his question was, when does the base area take this? And you kept saying they, and by they, I assume you mean the base area. The base area association, but I don't see, well, with the exception of maybe Vail, putting another storefront in there or doing something. Then that doesn't, they is different than somebody coming in and becoming part of the base area. So in essence, this would need to also filter to somebody else, an entrepreneur, a small business owner, or someone with some kind of initiative to say, I'm ready to join this thing, right? Is that kind of as
Yeah,
well,
or I
right?
mean, they would have to buy space from somebody that already owns it.
Right.
So.
So I think focusing and saying they is accurate right now, but then you've got to bring other folks in. to that,
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a really good point, Michael. Absolutely. And I think that when we're looking at, you know, the context and the, you know, the language that's in the master plan, I don't think that we'll be referring to the base area owners right now. We will just be talking in general about the development of the commercial core, which is the area of the base area and just around it and on Gothic Road. So it definitely could be a future entrepreneur or developer or business person. So absolutely good point, though. We will make sure not to say they as much. Sorry about that. Anything else on this one before we go down?
Somebody with a mic asked if anybody else. Please.
Does anybody on Zoom have questions before we move on?
Alrighty. So let's get into those community vision principles that we talked about so much with our stakeholders and steering group meeting. These are kind of the, you know, the hot topics, the pillars, the main focuses of the master plan. So that just kind of think about it in that way. And it's our community vision, and these are our principles. So for number one, it's that increase options for community housing. And below each one of these is just a description of what that really means. And so, you know, right now we're experiencing a shortage of housing. We want to focus on meeting the needs of that local workforce and our broader community. And we want to take some steps to identify what our limitations are and the availability of needed housing, and develop policies and partnerships to go ahead and increase those options if possible. So that's kind of what that main pillar means in a very like short-winded way. Improve the multimodal transportation network. And that's about exploring opportunities to increase connections among neighborhoods and businesses, enhancing access to recreation, increasing vibrancy, and maintaining our small town feel by exploring transportation alternatives and enhancement. And that doesn't just mean the buses are in your car, but bikeability and walkability as well. Number three, focus on placemaking and vibrancy. We want to prioritize the creation of gathering spaces, indoor and outdoor spaces, supporting restaurants, cultural facilities, and businesses that contribute to an active commercial core, and as well as complete neighborhoods, so that the placemaking and vibrancy isn't just about the commercial core or base area, it's also about our neighborhoods. Number 4, taking an active role in responsible growth. You know, as we evolve, as we grow, the town should take a proactive measures to protect and enhance its natural assets, which fuel this community's economic engine. Further development and decision-making should maintain the community's small town character while balancing the needs of full-time residents, part-time residents, and visitors. And then number 5, expand access to essential services. Basic services like medical offices, post office, grocery retail, childcare, personal care, and indoor recreation facilities are largely unavailable in Mount CV right now. And the town could seek partnerships with and policy changes to increase the availability of those essential businesses and facilities within the community. Off to the right here is just a graphic. Oh, sorry. Yes, Janet, I'm sorry.
When I read through these, I had never heard the word placemaking before I read this. And I'd like to have you expound a little bit on what that means.
Absolutely, Janet. So placemaking is, you know, I mean, placemaking and vibrancy kind of do go hand in hand, but placemaking is creating spaces that people want to live, work, and play in, as well as learn. So placemaking is when you go somewhere or you arrive somewhere and you feel like this is the place that I want to be. This is the space that everyone wants to go to and wants to spend time in. So that is like what placemaking is. Does that help you kind of understand that a little bit better? The graphic out to the right is another response to a survey question, and it was just what makes Mount Crested Butte unique and choosing your top 3. And the natural beauty and mountain views were just above the access to recreation trails and outdoors, followed by that community of or quality of life. And that's a really big community element. And I think the community element is really important to our town. And even in some of the responses to questions that had like other options or were full on write-in questions, community was mentioned a lot. I think that Shada is next, so I want to take any questions about this guy right now if you want. Sure.
You know, have any of your efforts identified policies that, you know, if changed would be beneficial? You know, because I'm reading on number 5, you know, town should seek partnerships and policy changes to increase the availability of essential businesses. Well, you know, does any of your work go into examining what policies we have to see what is anti-business or, you know, working against us?
Absolutely. Yes. And
So when will we get that information? Because everything that, you know, my frustration with this whole process is that it is so general and everything needs to be brought back into, you know, specificity in order to be able to actually move something forward.
You're gonna love our next 2 work sessions. There's one thing I love, it's policy. And so it has to start out general. We need to understand what the community wants, and we need to understand that vision before you distill it down into policies and action items and recommendations. And so what is going to come out of these 5 vision principles are goals, and then policies for implementing those particular goals that take in consideration, you know, how we could increase availability of essential businesses on the mountain, how we can, you know, encourage affordable housing, et cetera. And we'll have each different section and short-term, midterm, and long-term things that we can work on to implement these various plans. For example, placemaking is a great one, where you're not just going to redevelop the entire base area tomorrow. But what can we do in the interim while those changes are taking place? And there are small things that you can do on a small scale, like create little vignettes where people want to hang out through lighting and planters. And it sounds really simple, but if you think of most places where you want to hang out, it has those little kind of tactile elements to it to where you want to hang out, but that doesn't require you to develop the Cimarron parcel, for example. So we'll definitely be getting into that. And a master plan is, your initial step in a lot of future code amendments and other policy changes to help align what the town code says to a document that allows for this vision to be implemented. Sorry to jump in there.
Hey, Lisa.
Okay, I've got a question that kind of piggybacks on Dwayne's. It says the town should seek partnerships. Can you give us a few examples of what those partnerships are? I have no vision.
Sure, absolutely. So for an essential service, let's go to that grocery store, right? We do have a small market here. And if the town would partner with, maybe a developer or, whoever might build something new that might have the space, a large enough space for a market here in Mount CB, and partner with maybe the people that currently own the market here in town, as well as that developer, to subsidize to get that grocery store in there and started to get it on its feet. Now, that's something that Mountain Village did next to Telluride. They subsidized that grocery store to get it off its feet, and now it's good, and they're going, and they no longer need that subsidization. But that's like an example of a partnership that we create that then makes that business thrive. Does that make sense? Does that help? Is that a good example?
Sort of.
Okay.
So I think I read something that Greg had written in something I read this morning, that the base area is owned privately. So I'm wondering, I'm trying to wrap my head around all of this, establishing partnerships with these 4 entities downtown Mount Crested Butte. That was that going to be the highest and best use? Is our highest and best use what their highest and best use might be?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that anybody that let's say there was a parcel developed in the base area, let's say it's where the parking is right now, our main parking area. And whoever owns that parcel, I know that we all know, but let's just say whoever owns that parcel partners with a developer to go ahead and develop that parcel. And maybe it's adding a parking garage that's wrapped with either housing or lodging. And at the base of that, at the street level, it's retail. And I think that any developer or business person would want to make sure that they provide a retail space that's going to be filled long-term and is going to be successful. So I think they'd be interested in something like that, especially if it's, a really big want for the community. Is that like a more helpful example? Okay, go ahead, Carlos.
Sorry. Still. Also in the base area, we have the DDA, so it's not just exploitation, it could actually be a monetary contribution to but it can be a monetary value that we could bring to certain aspects of the town, most notably in the downtown development authority.
For sure. And then like for another partnership is just, we have a partnership with the DDA, but being, very active with those guys and making sure that the work that they're doing right now is encouraging all the, goals of the master plan and the goals that the town has, and making sure that we're really involved in that and increasing that placemaking and vibrancy and expanding on those essential services in our commercial core. Go ahead, Dwayne, sorry.
Well, I'm struggling with private entities now.
Mhm.
Different priorities, focus, what have you. And so I get hung up on why do we want to spend our time, initially on the private entity part of what is not our downtown, based on what I've read, and focusing on what the town owns and what the town can actually, do something with. We have property that it makes sense to me that our focus should be on what we already have control of, and exercising Roman's vision of what, of properties that we already own
Mhm.
there, and doing something with that versus trying to get some unknown person / entity, excited about doing something.
Okay. Well, I think that it's not just about what the properties that private people own, but also our properties. The two of the properties.
To me, it's about what's the, as Lisa said, the greatest, good that can be created with our efforts. And so my first thought goes to, well, let's work with what we already own. Something that we don't have to develop collaboration with necessarily, that we can just impose our policies and, on, things that we already have that we don't have to change.
It's
We
definitely a
can just
both.
Move them forward.
Dwayne, it's definitely a both thing. It's definitely a both. The policies will change code, which will change how development happens. So it's definitely a both thing. And it's also a land use thing, which land use will be part of the master plan as well. So it's definitely that, but another option is to look at partnerships. For example, for a housing example, the town of Breckenridge partnered with a developer to build affordable housing on a property that they own. And it got it done quickly and efficiently and sustainably. So that's like they own that property, but they're still partnering with the developer on it.
It's also using other people's money.
Yeah.
And generating
I'm
sales
thinking,
tax.
We own property that we can partner with DDA, which is other people's money. I got, a very tentative grasp on that part of it, but, I'm just, I'm a little bit confused, I guess, by this whole thing about, where our focus is being encouraged to be. Maybe, the next two meetings are going to, flesh this all out for me, but, for me, it's just, like I'm more inclined to, favor the, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead with, approach with, going with something that is already ours, things that we don't have to, appease some outside entity to get something done. I like the, let's work with, what we've got first, and then set the example for the entities that, may or may not be, enthusiastic about coming in and doing something, and, just so, showing by example, what can be done versus, hoping somebody, can get on board. And I acknowledge this is just my frustration bubbling to the surface on all of this, that that's me, sorry.
So Tori spoke to this, but it is, I hear what you're saying, and we should definitely take advantage. There's only so much land in Mount CB, and we should implement our priorities on our land. I hear what you're saying there, but the private sector also needs to know what framework they have and what vision the community has. And I don't know if I'm trying to help clarify things for you.
Exactly what I'm trying to say, maybe in, my offhanded way, that we need to be, showing everyone else what our vision is, by moving things forward on parcels that we already own, instead of, doing the shotgun, well, let's, hope, somebody else will get enthusiastic about what we're telling them they have to do. And once again, I know I'm not being very succinct, and I apologize for that. I'm just a little.
So what I'm hearing, Dwayne, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that in terms of some of the goals that we would be putting into, say, this item number 5, you'd like to see not only, things policies that could help encourage certain types of development within the private sector, but, some maybe goals around what the town could be doing as well.
Well, yes, and the priority should be reversed, not what the private sector can do, but what can the town do? The town's, up here as the responsible responding entity, have them, have town be the lead and not sitting back and, hoping that the private sector will step up and, take the ball and run with it.
Sure.
That's where my frustration is that, all this stuff is about, well, it's about trying to encourage outsiders to come in and implement our vision.
That's land use in general everywhere. I mean, if you look at this map, this has all been done by mostly by private development, but it's been guided by the town and in the vision of the town through land use code. So,
and we have what we have, for better or for worse, by following that. And so, do we want more of what has gotten us what we've got, or do we actually want to take the bull by the horns and, and I'll defer to you, Roman.
I was just gonna say, ask not what the base area can do for you.
Perhaps, Dwayne, it would be helpful for me, like if you and I want to sit down, we can just kind of workshop some things offline, because I do want to keep us on task, and we've got a lot of stuff with regard to the transit studies. No, I think this is important dialogue to have, and you're raising issues that we might not have here or we might not have discussed, and that's why we have these work sessions to get this feedback. And I would like to hear more from you on this topic to see how we can implement or integrate parts of that into the plan.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Dwayne. And I do know that this is our first step towards what you're going for. I know it doesn't seem like it, but it is.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else that wants to? Yes, Lisa.
Random question, because I have no idea what the answer
There's
is.
no random questions allowed. No, I'm just kidding.
Does the town of Mount Crested Butte have any random parcels we could trade or do a land swap to get a better positioned parcel to do something?
It's definitely something that could be considered. There's several parcels that you guys own within the town, parcel F, the Snowmass lot that's currently parking, things like that could be developed.
That's
We
not
don't
us.
own that.
You don't
We
own,
lease it.
you lease it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Across the lot we own them.
so that could be a lease agreement then.
Well, we have a lease agreement with.
Right
the
now,
owner.
it could be amended to
Yeah.
put something else on it.
Potentially.
Okay.
That'd be a partnership though with the owners.
Right, and yeah, absolutely. So things you have control of. And I think that the town doesn't need to decide, with parcels that either you do own or that you have some type of control or lease agreements that could be amended, what you want to do with that. Because I know that there is some discussion, and I don't want to bring up a can of worms, so we're not going to, but there's some discussion on certain parcels of what belongs there. And so that kind of needs to be talked about, and that's a land use thing. Anything else?
What was that potential lease space? Sorry, it's Brent Thompson, Treasury Liquors. What was that potential lease space? I mean, there's so much with retail that it's all about. With us, it's what side of the road are you on? On the right side, on the right side of the road in the US, traveling home for a liquor store, you'll receive 25 to 30% more business than the exact same store on the other side of the street. So obviously positioning is extremely important when you're looking at, different retail has different, demands. The retail that's walking in the base area, it doesn't really matter if it's left or right, but something like a grocery store, or a liquor store, the side of the road is extremely important. So where people are living, proximity to parking lots, potential lease spaces, that type of thing it's not just what the space is, it's the side of the road it's on for us. It's that type of thing. When we looked into purchasing treasury and stuff, we did a couple of different surveys and stuff, and that's one of the things that was pretty eye-opening to us. So it's just one of those things that sometimes gets lost in the mix too, is the direction of travel of people on roadsides type things. So
Absolutely. And would you say that if there was development that was engaging Gothic Road on that right side, you guys would be, or, market or owners like yourselves would be very interested in something like that and in having an anchor on that side of the road? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've looked at some just mixed use options type of thing. I mean, in the broad spectrum, if you had the first meetings you went to where it was like, okay, we have a paintbrush, let's draw the whole thing out. And that comes down to, oh, what would be the perfect solution? Like, great, you've got parking, you've got, that type of thing. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely been some areas that we've been like, that'd be great. Cause I mean, in the last, year and change, it's been eye-opening to just making a few small changes to people's reactions and facing, that type of retail market. So. I don't know.
Absolutely. And I know that the economic study, and when we review that in the next couple meetings, we'll also, touch on that as well. So that'd be a good one to attend as well.
Yeah, thanks.
Keep hanging out with us.
You got it.
Anybody else on Zoom that has a question or wants to talk about something related to the community vision principles? Alrighty. Anybody else in the room before we move on? Hopefully we'll have that time for that Q&A at the end too. So if you think of something, write it down. And Shada, are you on the phone or on the Zoom?
I am here. How are you guys?
Everybody's
I'm going
great.
to ask, it's been a good discussion so far. Tori, I'm going to ask that if there are questions, it's kind of, I can see the room, but everybody's really small. So if someone could just interrupt me if I need to stop for a question, or if I am stopped and I don't see a hand raised, that's just because I can't see them. So please just kind of shout out or let me know.
Absolutely.
So,
I got you, Shada.
Thanks. So I wanted to talk to you guys a few things. Last time we visited about the transit study, we had just done kind of the data analysis piece, and we were getting into the best practices. So at this point, we have completed all of the best practices. And what we came up with was kind of a summary of key findings that we've actually phrased as a case for action in the report, because there's recognition that this transit analysis is a really good first step. But in order to really think through what potential recommendations or what changes could happen in the system to make efficiency better or increase operational spending, a variety of things, you really need to look at those all together and in kind of a transit study that's a little bit more focused on future conditions and incorporates a variety of transportation conditions and also factors such as the master plan. So we've heard from Mountain Express that is, their next 5-year plan is something that they are planning to do soon. I don't know if Jeremy is in the room or if Hillary has that timing. If anyone wants to know, I don't know that particular timing, but the findings from this, we intend to be something that's really useful for discussions through the master plan process, also for future transit analysis, and also just for general discussions as a variety of developments or ideas move forward with town. So this isn't designed to, provide you guys with all of the recommendations that I know you really want, but it's a really great first step. And I think we came out with some really thoughtful and useful findings. So since we haven't talked about the best practices before, I'll just give a quick overview of kind of what we looked at and kind of the different factors. So we looked at 3 core peer agencies, and that was the Lyft in Winter Park, Start in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and the Breckenridge Free Ride in Breckenridge, obviously. And we looked at a couple of other places too, just for, you know, maybe a little bit of data here, a little bit of data there, but those 3 places really seem to be geographically operating in similar context. And then also things like, you know, how they fund their system. We thought that there were differences to where we could learn the service types that they used. There were some similarities, but then there were also differences. So we tried not to look for places that were the exact same, but places that had some commonality, so we could have a baseline for how might this apply, or is this something that might be useful information for Mountain Express and Mount Crested Butte, but also something that you guys could really learn and maybe aspire to as well. And so we looked at the variety of different service types that each of those systems operate. You know, things like how are their local routes structured? Do they have commuter routes? What is the seasonality in their schedules? What does that look like? You know, how do they change from one season to the next? Also microtransit, that's becoming more popular, and we're seeing that in a lot more agencies, and particularly in some smaller transit agencies as well. So we looked at microtransit as well. We looked at transit centers. How are they using the transit centers? What types of amenities might be at a transit center, as well as park and rides, and recognizing that a transit center and a park and ride might have some common operational context, but they also might have some differences too. So we looked at all of those pieces, as well as, what am I missing? Fleet. We did look at kind of the different types of buses that different transit agencies are operating, also how they communicate their system to the community. That public information we've found through pretty much every transportation and transit project we've worked on is really crucial. And so really seeing how are people leveraging the data that they have, because Mountain Express has a lot of data. So how can they use that data? How are other places using that data to put information out to the community to help leverage that system that they're already running? And then we also included a little bit about funding. And we weren't originally anticipating on looking at funding, but after we kind of got through this and talked to Mountain Express, and we talked to staff in the town, funding is kind of one of those pieces that you can go really deep into it, but it also helps set that context. And I think one of the things that we really wanted to convey to all of you is that, you know, there's a couple of transit agencies, Jackson Hole and Breckenridge, for example, that operate at about twice the budget that Mountain Express does. But you know, for the ridership that Mountain Express is getting, you know, there are 800,000, I think, approximately riders or trips per year, and Breckenridge is, I think, about 1.5 to maybe 2 million. And so for the budget that that Mountain Express has, they're really doing a lot with that. And there's a lot of little things through all of the best practices where we saw some of those commonalities, and we saw, you know, what Mountain Express is doing. And so we think that there's a really good base level to really work on, and to take some of these key findings and kind of work on each of these pieces, and, you know, just make what you guys are already doing in town and what that transit system is doing, how it's running, just kind of take that to the next level. And so the key findings that I have on the screen are really those 7 different case for action statements. And the reason we wanted to think about it as more of a case for action is because this is really that starting point for, okay, what do we really do with this? And we didn't want it to just be things that, okay, well, here's a statement and that's what this means for this, but what do we do with it? So we tried to really think about it in forward thinking terms. And so the first thing is the seasonal changes that you all have. You know, there's visitors that maybe come to Mount Crested Butte in the winter that don't come in the summer, and vice versa. And so we see that those seasonal changes are actually an opportunity to increase ridership. What we see a lot of in some of the peer agencies is that they have kind of some consistency between their summer and their winter schedules, which allows them to have you know, kind of better promotion. It allows them to spend less money on some of those materials and getting the information out to people so that they can kind of capture that audience that maybe isn't riding right now, and really kind of boost that ridership in some of those more off seasons. The second one, you guys have probably heard me talk about this before. Frequency and span of service are really some of the biggest keys for the future. I mean, I always like to say that frequency is like a garage door, and that, you know, if your garage door only opens once every hour, you're probably going to find a different way out of your house. And so if your bus is only coming once every hour, you're probably going to find a different way to get where you want to go. But if, you know, if your bus is coming every 10 minutes, then it's a lot easier to kind of have a flexible schedule and, you know, use that alternative transportation mode. And so really thinking about the frequency that you guys need to have in town to be able to provide the options so that people can leverage the transit system even more. And then also that span of service. Right now, what we see is that the frequencies for operation for the routes are typically consistent throughout the whole day. And so there's always fluctuations between when people want to use transit or when people are needing to go to certain destinations and when they're not. And there's, you know, sometimes there's more of a fluctuation than others. And I think on a typical day, you're going to see some hours of the day where you just don't have as many riders. And so the question becomes, do you need to be providing that same amount of frequency for some of those routes? And really, this is a planning question whenever, you know, doing scenarios. So there's a lot that we can't get into, but we think it'd be really meaningful for the town and some of the next steps to really think about how they can best pair that frequency to increase the frequency when you really need it, with thinking about the span of service and when you're operating different routes, and when you're really operating on certain frequencies to make sure that you have the best mix, which can really provide some operational savings. The third one is that, you know, really there's a lot of times whenever we see that you're operating at really peak demand, particularly in the winter time, you know, whenever there are heavy snow days or holidays, and how Mountain Express is operating during those times as far as adding unscheduled trips, you know, kind of sliding buses in to provide additional frequency to relieve those buses that are just getting overloaded. That's one of the biggest best practices that we see across other mountain transit agencies. And so it's just really great to note that that is a best practice that you're already doing. So to kind of keep that up, and maybe there are also opportunities to kind of make that a little bit more formalized in the future. I'm going to pause before I go on to the next set, because I know I've said a lot of stuff. Are there any questions so far?
More of a comment about Mountain Express.
For sure, Roman.
Mountain Express has increased frequency of the Snodgrass route and has seen a significant increase in ridership.
That's
and
awesome.
Then the long play is most likely to take up the late night service, but that's
Still in the
a
works.
bit down the road.
Yep.
But it's on the radar of Mountain Express.
Awesome.
2 thumbs up. You guys are.
Could you describe the definition of microtransit for me?
Piggyback ride.
We all started writing at the same time.
Yeah, so microtransit can take a few different forms, but really it's an on-demand service that kind of fills gaps in coverage. So think about it in terms of, you know, say that you have a route that's connecting destination A and destination B, but there's a neighborhood over here that just doesn't have any service to it, but there's not a lot of demand. There's not quite enough demand to schedule a bus to regularly go there, or to go there at enough frequency to make it operationally efficient. And so a microtransit is kind of more of an on-demand service where you can have kind of a coverage area. A lot of places do kind of a flex coverage area. And what they'll do is there's maybe a van or a small bus. You could also use, some places will use something like an Uber or a Lyft service. They can partner with that type of an agency and use vouchers. It kind of depends on the level of demand that you think there is for microtransit. But you can use that kind of to cover a whole area so that you can still provide service to people. They can call in, or they could use an app. If there were to be, you know, a Mountain Express app, or if you were to partner with a service to provide that, they might have an app that you know, you could integrate and use. So they would call in and say, hey, I want to go somewhere here, and they'd schedule a pickup. Sometimes it's entirely call based, and other times there might be kind of a flexible route to where, you know, maybe there's a van circulating in an area, and all you have to do is call it, and, you know, within 20 to 30 minutes, you can reliably have a ride that'll take you to, sometimes they might take you to any destination in town, or there might be certain destinations like a transit center, or it could be the commercial core, you know, the base area that it might take you to, and then you can, you know, continue on your trip from there. You could connect to Crested Butte via fixed bus route service, or, you know, even to Gunnison through RTA. Is that helpful?
Yep, thank you.
Nicholas, did you also have a question? I thought you had a hand up. Okay, just want to make sure I'm eagle-eyeing it. All right, Roman.
And Dusty, Mountain Express is aware of the limitations of its current bus fleet. Just buses can't go everywhere, so it's on the radar to contemplate a different type of vehicle as expansion into other areas is looked at.
Thanks, great.
I have a question. Obviously, frequency and span of service, you know, change. The more frequent and more places you go, the more ridership you get. But you suggest changing frequency during the day. We have a lot of visitor and second homeowner riders that people just don't ride every day. If you're changing the frequency during the day, it gets very confusing. We have enough problems with people getting confused about when the bus is coming and when it's not. And if you're changing frequency several times a day, they'll never figure it out. How do you balance those things?
So you're absolutely right. Most transit agencies do not operate consistent frequencies all day long or for a full 16, 17 hours of service, just because they know, like, late at night, you just don't have nearly as many people as you do kind of in the middle part of the day. But and you're right, and we're not saying that you definitely need to do that, but that is a key consideration with any future transit planning that thinks about routes and route structure. You know, that needs to be a core piece of it, is what we're really trying to say. But I will say that information is so crucial, and having consistent information at bus stops, having places that are really easy for people to find out, where is my bus? That's usually kind of the biggest question, is where do I catch the bus and where is my bus? And so the more information that you can put online or in an app, there are also some really amazing transit apps that are already out there that you can just feed your system's information into, so you don't have to actually have the cost of creating an app or maintaining it. And then a lot of those people use for multiple cities. So especially people like second homeowners, they might already have those apps for other cities where they live or where they visit. But it's, you know, something that's easy to have with you that can say, this is where I catch the bus, this is when it's coming, and to have that confidence of, I know that I'm going to get where I want to go, and not like where I don't understand what's happening in the system, or why can't I catch the bus now? It came every 10 minutes earlier in the day, but why isn't it coming now? A lot of that is really just massive amounts of public information that's consistent and put out in a variety of platforms.
Okay, I'm just gonna remind everybody that it's 5:35 and we have till 5:50. So I'm not trying to cut anybody off. I just want to make sure everybody is aware of the time. It's my job today.
Okay, So I hope that answers your question, but you're right. It's a balance. And so I'll just kind of quickly go through the rest of these four.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. So just thinking about route structure, and then also thinking about operations, those two things, changing some of the structures of the routes, and all of this is in the plan that you guys can read a little bit more. But we think that there are some efficiencies that could be gained for operations, but really partnering that with how the routes operate and interact with each other is important. So kind of those fourth and fifth bullet points kind of mesh together. And then again, as Roman noted, the fleet is definitely a constraint, but there are things that you can do. There are ways that you can structure the service around that, but recognizing that in any future planning, that fleet is going to be really important. So whether that's an operational consideration or even a capital consideration, that needs to be factored into future planning. And then we just talked a little bit about the public information. Having really clear, easy to find public information that's consistent can really help drive ridership and make people feel comfortable and confident about their decision to not drive. So we
Anybody questions on that guy before we move to another slide? Sure, Dwayne.
Is there any reason why, the transit study portion of this plan has to go through us and can't just go straight to Mountain Express?
I think it's just. Oh, Hillary, are you going to answer that?
Hillary answering questions.
Yeah, no, I can help address this one. Well, the transit study was started before I arrived with Mount CB, so I can't entirely speak to the exact scope. But what I can speak to is the fact that land use in transit and transportation are definitely related to one another. And so demand and everything else is going to also be impacted by, well, we'll get into this when we get to the Gothic corridor capacity study, but the full build out of the base area, how does that impact traffic patterns? So we do have an influence as a community on our traffic patterns and on our transit patterns. And this is also as a tool for us to work with Mountain Express and how do we approach this issue regionally, because we're just Mount CB, but our traffic flows through another town and out throughout the valley. So this will also help with that framework and how we can approach these things regionally. And I'm not sure if you were able to go to the Gunnison County's roadmap electeds dinner, but that's one of the components that they're discussing is how can we approach, transit regionally, housing, all these other regional issues from a regional lens.
And thank you.
Welcome.
My thinking in it is because we, Mountain Express doesn't just work with us. They also work, with Crested Butte. It seems from an efficiency perspective, and maybe I'm missing the boat here, but this whole part of the master plan, should be filtered first through Mountain Express and then to us, because they, work with us and Mount Crested. I'm just trying.
Sure, no, I hear what you're saying.
Establish some kind of efficiency in this, why it starts with us and then,
It's also a matter of timing. We needed data and we didn't have the data from Mountain Express and they won't be moving forward with their process. So
we don't have the data either. So, I'm back to my original.
Well, the
point.
Gothic Road capacity study does have data about full build out. So it's just, again, we needed information in order to make informed decisions to move forward. And you can't always get alignment with other jurisdictions or other agencies' master planning processes. And it's just one of the unfortunate yet frustrating aspects of any regional planning issue.
Can I say one more thing to it?
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry.
And then we should probably move
we'll have to
on.
move on.
That way we can cover the rest of the slides.
But Dwayne, Shada has done a great job as involving Mountain Express during this whole study. So we are kind of working hand in hand with them. So it's not like we're doing this and then giving it to them at the end. So we are creating some efficiencies there.
Yes, I'm just a little frustrated that, all this stuff hasn't already been worked out with Mountain Express And so we have to spend this, our time doing this and then, and it's just my twisted perspective on the process. Whatever needed to be done with transportation was actually done with the who then respond to us instead of the other way around. It just seems like it's going top down instead of bottom up to me.
We got about 10 minutes left. So let's, can we do the Gothic Road capacity bit of it? I think that's,
I'm gonna do this really quick. So you all have the Gothic Road, or I believe you all have the analysis. Really we were wanting to have some level of understanding of if there are no changes along Gothic Road with the existing infrastructure. And, we think of what is the capacity, if the capacity is actually built out from the master plan, from the land use assumptions. If we take the current heavy volume days and we project that out with that built environment, what does that look like for Gothic Road? And the idea here was not that, we're ignoring other potential development, but that just at that core part of town, just having an understanding and language to come together and say, okay, this is what we might experience. That was really kind of the intent, to help this be kind of that guiding baseline. And so what we found is during the heavy volume traffic days currently, traffic is operating at acceptable levels. With future growth estimates though, those heavy volume days will see some intersections that operate at what we're calling unacceptable levels. But I would encourage all of you to continue to have conversations and think about as a town, as far as what is an acceptable level of delay to the town. And is that different, on those really heavy winter days, like kind of how we modeled versus a typical day, because the travel patterns fluctuate very significantly for Mount Crested Butte. The level of infrastructure and the investments that you might want to make really need to be grounded in what do you all think is acceptable and what are you trying to mitigate. And that's something that, there are level of service definitions that say this level of service is unacceptable and this one is acceptable. But really, whenever we think about congestion, it's not just the amount of delay, but congestion means that people are there. And it means that there's potential for economic opportunity and more activity. So really, I think the Gothic Road capacity is saying that there is a lot of capacity on the roadway. There might be some points on really heavy days in the future with build out, which was assumed to be from the levels in zoning and master plan assumptions, that some of those might be really long. But we would encourage you all to take that information and be thoughtful and use this in future discussions to say, what might this actually mean? And do we want to spend investments to try and mitigate some of those impacts?
Questions for Gothic Road capacity? Are you scratching your head or raising your hand? Okay, scratching. Okay, just kidding.
I'm scratching my head too, but along the lines of what are our options? When I look at Gothic Road, I go, yeah, how are you gonna change that?
So I'm glad that you mentioned that. There could be some extreme options where there might have to be right of way that would be purchased if you wanted to possibly put in a roundabout at certain locations, potentially signals. But I think what I'm actually going to talk about next is the transportation demand management. And I think that paired with also transit, there are a variety of things that I think the town could do, and working with developers, working with business owners, and employers, with the mountain or the mountain resort, but to really try and help find ways to mitigate some of that traffic. Are there ways to intercept people before they get into town, and have them park, somewhere else and use transit to get back into town, which goes into kind of that idea of working with Mountain Express on what might a future transit system look like? What might those frequencies be? And are there opportunities to kind of increase some of that transit service, from maybe some potential locations that don't exist today, but could in the future, to kind of mitigate some of that traffic that's coming into the center of town. So I think that there are a variety of kind of lower cost things that could be done that can help mitigate this.
Like intercept lots.
Yeah, intercept lots, technology is also a really important thing, just making sure you can use dynamic messaging signage and apps to inform people of where is there parking, where isn't there parking, encourage them to go to certain locations over others. And then there's also potentially shuttles that you could do with, if there's a new development in town, potentially there's a way that you could work with the developer to incorporate, TDM strategies that encourage people who stay there or work there to not drive and to take other means. And maybe there's a partnership with Mountain Express to do a small shuttle that goes into circulation route. So there's, we're going to be developing through the TDM strategy a whole list of things that could be done. And those are going to be, I guess we can actually maybe go to the next slide. So TDM is really focuses on using policies, programs, and then maybe some smaller projects, but it's focusing on changing people's behavior so that you reduce single occupancy driving and ease the need for parking. And so we're going to be working to define kind of a holistic strategy for the town that is integrated with the master plan. So with the goals of the master plan and what you all are trying to accomplish. And then we're going to be thinking about that in short and long-term recommendations. So what could you do quickly? What might be things that you need to work more as a long-term strategy? Where might there be partnership opportunities with developers or business owners? But then we're also going to separate out those recommendations based on how people travel and why people are traveling to town. Because we know that people who live in town have different travel patterns than people who are visiting town for, just to go skiing for a couple of days. And people who work in town have different travel needs. So there's strategies that you can use to meet each of those different needs, both in the short term and in the long term.
Thanks, Shada. I know Janet had a question.
Well, it's more of a comment of, I realize North Village will have to be doing their own traffic study, but I feel like this whole process here has totally ignored that there are plans for stuff going in at North Village. And I feel like that's just a big hole in this.
Jada, were you guys able to look at the previous traffic study for North Village?
So we did, and what we used the inputs, the outputs from that traffic study as inputs to ours. We just didn't focus on that particular level of development happening, and that was more of a directive because there have been changes in what that development might be, and there was really just kind of a request to better understand that commercial core area first. And then that gives an ability for the town to have conversations with the developer of any future development in town to say, okay, well, if we're all assuming this is kind of the baseline for future growth and what we might see on Gothic Road, then how does that particular development further impact this?
Does that help answer your question, Janet, a little bit? We can also talk about any of these things, to next time, or write them down and we'll try to get answers to you as soon as possible. We have 1 minute.
Yeah, a couple minutes left. Any last questions, Roman?
Will we have another opportunity to actually talk about the Gothic Road study document? Because that was fairly complex and I didn't really grasp a lot of it.
Seems like we kind of ran short on time.
Right.
So maybe we can, what we didn't get to tonight, or as mentioned, write down your questions and we'll try to do that next work session.
Like, please explain the document.
All 60 pages of it.
I think whatever it takes.
Okay.
Right?
Sure.
You're not a transportation expert, Roland?
I'm not.
Happy to do that.
All right, anything else before we wrap up? Thanks, everyone, for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for everybody that joined us. Appreciate it.